Get ready to bridge worlds and elevate your understanding of growth, resilience, and the power of connection. Welcome to episode 6, Resilience Through the Written Word.
Welcome back to Bridging Worlds. I'm Malcolm, your co-host, joined by my lovely wife, Amanda, the award-winning short story writer, former professor, thriving entrepreneur, and the only person who can proofread me mid-sentence.
Thank you, question mark.
Today, we're diving into resilience, how Amanda's life experiences shaped her journey, and how she's helping others through her business. Amanda writes, edits, and consults wonderful business. She also happens to be, of course, my lovely wife.
What a coincidence.
Before we jump in, let's take a moment to remind everyone about the heart of Bridging Worlds. This podcast is about bringing Amanda's world and my world together, creating a space where we explore personal and professional growth with our listeners. Whether we're discussing resilience, leadership, storytelling, we want to connect with the moments that matter in your life and work.
We're here to bridge the gap between the personal and professional, helping you navigate both with a little insight, inspiration, and maybe a laugh or two.
Absolutely. And don't forget to visit us at www.bridgingworldspodcast.com to share your thoughts and ideas. Amanda, are you ready to talk about resilience, writing, and maybe your undercover FBI factory farm story?
Always.
Let's talk about Amanda's journey, your upcoming novel about the FBI infiltrating a factory farm. Seriously, where did this idea come from? Was there an emotional aha moment that inspired it?
There were 2 articles that I read that made me think that some of my obsessions, that the themes and the subjects that I always became obsessed with going down that rabbit hole, could be turned into an actual novel-length project that could not be easily categorized into a genre. And one of the articles was in Harper's, and the other one was in the New Yorker. And one of them was sort of an expose of an undercover animal rights activist that infiltrated a poultry farm and described in gross detail what their life was like, their brief life, the hormones, the fact that they couldn't stand up in their cage or turn around. They were sleeping in their feces. They were deformed. They were pumped through chemicals, which, kids in cafeterias were eating the eggs that came from these animals that were pumped through. I was always involved in animal rights activism and ethical treatment of animals. I've always been a vegetarian, which I discovered wasn't quite enough a lot of the time. So the expose really sort of opened my eyes to factory farming. And then there was another article, and it was detailing an FBI agent, or the equivalent of what the UK has as an FBI agent. We used to send our FBI agents out for months, if not years. So that was called deep cover. And what would happen, as you might imagine, is that close personal ties form between the undercover agents and the domestic terrorists whom they're trying to infiltrate. So there was this one undercover operative who had a family, wife, kids, went undercover for months, fell in love, started another family undercover with wife and a child. And so it's really about masks, and it's really about the different personas that we have and how we categorize the different sides of ourselves to survive, whether it's a result of dealing with trauma, or if you're code switching, or if you have to protect yourself from micro or macro aggressions at work. So it was sort of the perfect melding of animal rights, of exposing the atrocities of factory farms, and in creatively dealing with my own fractured self.
I love you talking about the FBI. As you know, I'm obsessed with FBI, CIA shows. One of my favorite ones was the Gangs of London, which you and I watched, I guess it was 2 seasons of it so far on AMC Plus. We got a free week through Prime, and we just binged on that show.
Right? There are so many undercover TV shows and series out right now, which I think is extremely interesting at this place in time politically, how the theme keeps coming up of having to or needing to pretend that you're someone that you're not until that pretending becomes real.
Yeah. And I know someone who lived that double life too. I know that that's real. He had 2 families, and it shocked me that he was living this life for so long. And when I first met you and you were sharing about this book, I was so into it. I'm like, oh my God, I have to read this. And not only that, this has to be turned into like a show on Apple TV Plus or HBO or something. Max, excuse me.
Well, that's the fantasy of being a writer. Like it's no surprise that there are no movies, or there aren't a high number of movies made about writers, because it's so freaking boring. We sit there and we think and we type and we pull out our hair and we make more coffee and we pet our cats. So at the early parts of conceptualizing a book, starting and stopping, I think that it's important for people from the very get-go to practice their elevator pitch, to have one sentence ready for cocktail party conversations, for over the Thanksgiving dinner table. Because I think that if you are literate, you are a writer. I think that one needs to create and practice this elevator pitch so you can say it in your sleep, or when you're distracted, or when there's a lot of noise going on around you. I think that it's great. Why are you a writer in the first place? It's because you have an active imagination. So who would be your ideal main character? Like, who would I want to play Bobby? And you know who I want to play Bobby.
Right. I know exactly.
Mr. Phoenix. Who I
Joaquin.
Love. So, and then, I have Joaquin's real partner in mind for the love interest. And I've been saving photographs for years and years that would be like maybe a perfect photograph for my book cover.
Right.
I've been through countless titles. The first one was Agent Provocateur, which I soon found out is like a high-priced lingerie line for escorts and the other woman. And then I wanted to call it Deep Cover, which was like a film with Wesley Snipes in it or something.
That was a couple of deep covers.
Yeah, so very prevalent theme. So, and then I just stripped it down to the undercovers, which just is very basic. And so I think it's fun to sort of daydream about this stuff. And I think it is good for me to print my pages out and to bind them, to hole punch them, and to bind them in like a 3-ring folder that I got at Staples, so it became a real thing, and to even carry it around with me. So I would edit it everywhere. I'd edit it in the adjunct room at work. I'd edit it on the train. So I think that your passion and your obsession needs to be made a real thing as soon as possible, something you can reference easily, something that makes you pedigreed to call yourself a writer. I never want my clients or students to apologize, to start out anything with, oh, but I'm not a writer. Oh, but I'm not a good writer. Those are all lies that we tell ourselves because of fear. So that's sort of how I leaned into writing my book.
Yeah, some of my favorite times in watching you with your book is back in your old apartment in Harlem, and how you would have stuff scattered all over the floor, and it was organized in your mind. I kind of look at it like, oh my God, what is going on here? But it was your book. It was what passion.
I really believe in, I'm a visual learner and teacher, so I would storyboard, which is more for TV film, but I would print out my entire novel when it was like a big edition, revision. And then one of the biggest overhauls that I did was I completely changed the order of the chapters. So I literally like rearranged the chapters on my living room floor in Harlem and then put them back into the 3-ring binder in absolutely, totally, completely different order than they had started out.
Yeah, I love that. Amanda, how do you channel life's curveballs into creative storytelling?
Well, curveballs are nonstop, right? So they're nonstop when they're happening to us. So they really should be nonstop in fiction as well. Fiction is not autobiographical, but there is always going to be the reader that projects that onto the woman, especially the woman storyteller. So I think that for women or people of color specifically, it's a little bit trickier to navigate the waters of, like I've been in poetry readings where someone has raised his hand and sort of demanded of the female poet, does your husband know that you're writing about sex? Does your husband approve? My characters are divinely flawed, as we all are. The main character, the female main character, is what we used to call an unreliable main character, an unlikable, which is mainly prescribed to women, female characters. And so all of this is sort of like going on at the back of our minds. These are our own personal psychological curveballs. And then there's life curveballs. You're unemployed, you have chronic illness, you have a special needs child, you're unhoused for a short period of time. So I'm going to use the example of a short story that I wrote, and I was working on this story about a young mother, single mother who lived in a Chelsea hotel. This is sort of a result of having worked in the Chelsea hotel for 6 years as a personal assistant to high-profile client and their partners. And so I had all these incredible personalities swirling around my brain. The ghost in the Chelsea hotel, Sid Vicious knifing Nancy to death. I cat sat, I walked dogs, I house sat in famous people's apartments that I won't mention, but it was fantastic. I'd go to work early and hang out in the lobby with all these actresses walking through and artists who were giving the owner at the time paintings in exchange to stay in a Chelsea hotel for free for a month. And there were communal bathrooms upstairs, and sometimes somebody would nod off for being a little K-hole and the police would have to be called, or someone was turning tricks in this. It was a mess. And I loved it. So I was trying to make that into a story, and I was having a lot of trouble. So after a Saturday morning class at the new school, I went to Chipotle to get vegan burrito and loved my class. I was sort of in this little blissed out state of how lucky I am to have this privilege in New York City. And I looked down and someone had stolen my purse. And my purse was my backpack, and my backpack had my books, my journal, my cards, my keys, my phone, my license. By the time I realized this, the person had already charged a bunch of stuff. I walked to the nearest police station. Believe me, they were very busy doing other things and very understaffed. And so I was locked out of my house. Some sort of thief had my house keys, my address. I didn't have any money. I couldn't use my phone. So that was a bit of a disaster. So what do we do as writers? So I made the main character of my short story Montage lose her bag. And it was in, Grumpy's coffee house instead. And her background was different. And she was a parent to a college-age student. But this is almost too on the nose, but I wouldn't have that story, which won first place in a fiction prize in Normal School magazine a number of years ago. But that's how it's a choice that we have to turn our agonies and our misfortunes into something that's not happy and good, but so that we can transform it and we can control it through our characters and our plot lines. I had no control over having something stolen from me. And as you might imagine, you can extrapolate that put me back years into other things I couldn't control that happened to my body, that happened to my life circumstances. So with that sort of refreshed insight, I had a new perspective on this story. And it sort of became alive again. There was more at stake. There was more of me in it, but at the same time, from a safe, creative distance.
Yeah, that's a great points there that people should listen to. I don't think I ever shared this with you, but when I used to work for the Mosaic Company, I was a consultant for about 7, almost 8 years, I think. And I started writing a story, and the story was a fictional story based on my life.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I was traveling 100% for work. At first, I was in Detroit for about 10 months. And then I was in Houston for 2.5 years. And I'm traveling all these places, San Francisco for 6 months, all over the place. And I had all these friends and things kind of going on. I said, why not just make a character? So it reminded me a lot of that. But people can get into their own lives, create stories about what they're doing, write it down, whether it's fictional or non-fictional, and have fun with it. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I've always been sort of closeted and being jealous of my students. And when I hear other people, they're like, oh, I just wrote this book for fun. And I'm like agonizing here about something for like the well better half of a decade of trying to, wrap this first novel up. So I think that this concept ties directly back to the seed of the undercover and how we have divided selves. And I really encourage whomever is interested to try their hand at the craft of writing, because you can get a lot out without it being creative nonfiction, without it being memoir, without naming names. You can have composite characters. Like Anne Lamott said, if people are worried what you're going to write about them, they should have treated you better. So all of this I find therapeutic when coupled with the hard work that goes along with writing and revising.
And listen, you've been a professor, right? A writer, and now an entrepreneur with your business. What made you decide to launch Amanda Writes, Edits, and Consults? And more importantly, how do you balance helping others with their writing while you're working on your own book?
For me, and this is when I get a little woo-woo, it's all about energy and balance. Certain people can, always been envious of this, can teach 5 classes of Comp 1 every semester for 5 or 7 years or whatever, however long it takes to get the next salary bump up, and teach hundreds of students and grade hundreds of papers, and we're not paid for the grading, we're not paid for the prepping. I can't do that. I wanted to do that. I was sort of encouraged to do that, or explicitly encouraged to do that, and I couldn't do that. That's not how I'm wired, unfortunately or fortunately. What I did was just stay with 2 or 3 classes at a time, and then I went down to 2, and then COVID hit. And then my mental health was really suffering, because what I wanted to accomplish with my students and the realities of how many students I had, how big the classes were, the fact that I wasn't saving any money, it became impossible. And if I was in my 20s or 30s, I would have willingly and happily drank the Kool-Aid and climbed my way up that academic ivory tower. But in my late 40s, I didn't have the energy to do that. And I also was sort of energized in feeling this is wrong and I will not be taken advantage of. And it just got to a point where my resentments were the overarching thing, not my joy, not my ability to help my students. So what I started doing as an experiment is, what would happen if I took individual clients and charged them a whole lot more and worked with them one-on-one with the same skill and experience and attention? It works. I mean, it's hit and miss sometimes as far as clients come and go. I have steady clients, I have big projects, I have little projects. But I think that especially for something as subjective as the creative arts and education, that everybody is different. And I just learned sort of the hard way when my body just completely shut down, and it really affected my mental health. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of responsibilities outside of my rent and my friends and keeping up with classes, and it was just still way too much for me. So I think for me, or I know for me, that I was able to charge more per student, one at a time. The most important thing for me was decreasing stress. And I love absolutely every moment of what I do. I'm my own boss. If I see clients that call it an asshole tax, if I see they're going to be a little bit more demanding, I charge them more. I have very clear boundaries. If I make a mistake, I'm clear about that too. I would much rather have fewer clients that are higher paying clients than many clients that are lower paying clients.
So out of all your projects so far, what's been the most interesting or even more meaningful project that you've worked on lately?
So I'm not going to answer that question directly. Not because I'm argumentative, but because I can't answer it. So I'm going to give you a cop-out answer and say I'm going to give you a few because they're all so different. So I have worked on Mother of the Bride speeches, Matron of Honor, Father of the Bride speeches, and I really focus on storytelling and keeping the writing in their own voice. This goes for a detective cop novel that I'm about to start working on in earnest. Police procedural, I guess is what we used to call them, crime fiction. I've edited a manuscript of poems that were set in the Pacific Northwest by Native American writer I never met, that I never talked to, who's fantastic. And he vetted me. He screened me really hard, which was a little annoying. But then when I read his work, I was like, I'm privileged to work with this young man. I have been working on a couple longer memoirs or creative nonfiction for young men that have never written anything before. So they said that are terrible writers in their own words. And so it's really been fun to boost them up. I graduate continuing ed person of therapy. So I really did not expect to have this sort of be like a creative therapist or, I don't know, somehow midwife to these people with their creative process. So, I can help this young man who's Black and ex-military and renegotiating his relationship with addictions and relationships and maleness. And then I can work with another woman who just lost a baby. And it's sort of holding space if you welcome that sort of language. But all of those different things in different genres, it's the same. One thing that surprised me the most was I've been working on a lot of personal statement essays, which I did for hundreds of, I co-taught with very, very gifted teachers at John Jay every summer and every winter break for years. And so it's crafting the best 2-page double-space Times New Roman personal statement you can have to get into grad school, to get into Ivy League schools, to apply for scholarships, grants, awards. So a great number of my clients are either high school students applying to colleges, people applying to master's programs for social work or literature, English education, some students applying to PhD programs. It's a 2-page document. And there's a formula that I was sort of taught how to teach personal statement writing at John Jay, and I've adapted it and sort of turned it into my own. And it's really this scientific process. I know sort of exactly what these people on the reading panels, the judges, are looking for. And so I ask a lot of questions, and I never do the writing myself. I'm not a ghostwriter. I'm not helping people cheat. They can use AI for that if they want to. It's a lot cheaper. But it's such a privilege. It's so much fun to just, take somebody from, I'm a really bad writer, to, oh my God, I have so much to say about my 2 moms and being diagnosed neurodivergent as a young woman of color. And it's I can shine the light on how special they are and how unique they are and how they're unlike every other candidate there. So those are just a few of the things that the different genres and styles of writing I've been working on. And it's fun. It's not teaching the same Comp 101 class every year in and out, that's for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes I think you get excited, at least from what I see and what I hear after you get done with a client from time to time. I know you don't share everything with me, but your excitement because you're able to use your creativity in how you work with clients. I know you have a couple of young people that you work with on a regular basis and being able to help them out, and you get creative with what you're doing every single week with some of these people.
It's a lot of recycled material, having taught this work, and it's well tested, it's well vetted. I've adapted and changed, depending on what was working, what wasn't working for my students at John Jay. And so I have identical twins that are from Salt Lake City, and they have so much to write about. Being identical twins, being young women, being Chinese American, all this stuff going on, being in adolescent bodies, and, where do I differ from my twin? One is a debater. They both practice ballet. So just getting to know them, and their mother reached out to me because they wanted their daughters to be more emotionally expressive. And bless her heart, she saw that even though they are fantastic writers, that was a doorway. And so I'm able to use all the author interviews with Toni Morrison, Maxine Hong Kingston, et cetera. And I can show them little clips, and I have a lot of templates, and I have a lot of peer reviews, and I have enough experience to know when something's working, when I need to change my lesson plan. And so it's like the perfect segue from teaching 147 students with 28 students in a class sometimes to 2. And it's calm, and I'm energized afterwards, and I'm confident as I'm doing it, and I'm flexible, and I'm generous. It was a perfect transition from what I was doing previously, and everybody's benefiting from it.
Yeah, that's great stuff there. Listen, I'm very proud of you and the work that you're doing. And I know that people that you're helping have also benefited from the magic that you bring. Let's talk about writing as a tool for resilience. Do you think writing itself can be resilience, or is it more like controlled chaos, like channeling everything life throws at you into something productive?
So I want to break that down a little bit into my core belief system that other people might not believe with. But I really push against the cult of busyness and the hustle culture,
right,
and this need to be productive, blocking out periods of time. And I've been dealing with a chronic illness, I guess, for 2.5 months now.
Yeah.
And I really think, especially as artists, we have to lean into listening to our energy levels and the constraints of our bodies at times, or the needs of others who are depending on us. And so I think, of course, writing does build resilience. I think it is chaotic. I don't think there's such a thing as controlled chaos. It's, by definition, chaos is chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really subscribe, and I used to, the channeling everything life throws at you into something productive. I think that's too much pressure to put on an experienced writer, a beginning writer, a human being. So I think that the key is slowing down. I'm very into sleeping as much as I can, trying to speak more slowly, reading for pleasure at a slower rate. I don't do to-do lists like I used to anymore. I think that, and it's not like cheesy, appreciating the moment. It's a necessity for my mental and physical health right now. So I think that the real secret of resilience is easing up the pressure and perfectionism and the inner critic that we all put on ourselves.
Great. Thank you. And when you're working with clients, how do you help them navigate their challenges? I'm talking about writer's block, the imposter syndrome, or the dreaded blank page.
So again, I'm going to push against this stereotype of the writer. I don't personally believe that there's writer's block. I believe that we are afraid of certain things. We may not be ready to write about certain things. Maybe we need a little bit more therapy. Maybe we need a little bit more distance because something just happened to us. If your fingers work, you can hold a pen, you can type on a keyboard. There's no such thing as writer's block. Imposter syndrome is for real, yo.
That's real.
Is a killer. That is something that,
preach,
like, 15-year-olds have, 18-year-olds have, 50-year-olds have, 80-year-olds have. That I can work on with my clients, because I experienced that from the moment I walked into a classroom and the moment before. I kept walking into classrooms for 10 years. It gets your juices flowing, but you don't want to be emotionally dismantled by it. So that we can work with, we can unpack that, but no such thing as writer's block. I tend to work more with clients and students on procrastination. Why are we procrastinating? Why are we putting it off? Perfectionism. We want it to be perfect. So they go hand in hand. Want it to be perfect, so it'll never be perfect, so I'll put it off. Or we put it off until the very last minute, and then it has to be perfect, and it's just not going to be perfect at the last minute either.
Yeah.
So those are sort of, I don't really believe in grit per se. I think that grit in education is very important. I think that grit in the creative arts can be a little bit of a handicap. I don't believe in picking ourselves up from the bootstraps. I think that whatever blockages we have need to be broken down psychologically and with a lot of compassion and empathy.
Yeah, and I think with people with different personalities, look, for me, for example, certain parts of my life, grit work. And, I used to be a high school coach. I coached football, basketball, girls fast pitch, softball, and grit worked. I mean, it helped me win championships, right? But then as a PhD student, writing my dissertation, I had imposter syndrome.
Sure.
I was like, do I deserve this? Should I have my PhD?
And that's family stuff. That's intergenerational trauma.
Oh my God.
That is,
It is.
Race, class, gender. That is, do I deserve this?
Oh yeah. I mean, and my father had his doctorate and, he was always with me, but it was still kind of scary. If I didn't have Amanda with me to help me through this, and then my chair, Jody, I know Jody listens. Thank you, Jody, so much for helping me get through my imposter syndrome. I'm better for it.
I mean, I think there is such a thing as like fake it till you make it, and you pretend to be it and you become it. So I think we just all have to try out a lot of different tactics to see what works best for us.
Yeah. Creative writing classes must have been full of surprises. Can you share a moment where a student's work or experience taught you something about resilience?
Yes. So this started out being like one of my first failures in the classroom. And, this talking about imposter syndrome. So my very first day, I was hired 24 hours before. They needed to fill this slot of literature, and Valerie hired me, one of my very good friends.
Hi, Valerie.
Interviewed me over the phone. 24 hours later, I was standing in front of 38 college upperclassmen teaching literature, and I couldn't choose any of the texts. So I thought I was doing amazingly well. I felt like I was like channeling like the positive energy and spirit of my dead mother, who was a masterful teacher, especially with that age group. And all of a sudden, I have to teach Bartleby the Scrivener by Melville. A very long short story about nothing, about not a lot happens. Like there's this guy who works in a law firm, and he decides he doesn't want to work anymore. So the story is sort of about, now it's years since I read or taught this, but this guy doesn't want to do any work, and the people that he works for are trying to figure out why not, but they're also trying to figure out why he won't go home, why he's spending nights in the office, why he's eating weird things and losing weight. Like, they try to fire him. And his refrain is, I prefer not to. So when they're like, why are you working so late? I prefer not. Why don't you tell us why you're working so late? I prefer not to. Mm-hmm. Well, this brief is due by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Are you sure you can get that done? Well, I prefer not to. So everything was, I prefer not to. It is not my favorite short story to teach by far, but I was doing an okay job for a beginning teacher. And then I got this long email from one of my students saying how he hated the class, he hated the text. Why the hell was he supposed to read this? And what did that have to do with college education? Blah, blah, blah. So I was at home with a girlfriend who was also an English professor. She's trying to calm me down. I'm hyperventilating. So she gave me really good advice, which was make him stay after class or invite him to your office hour and make sure it's private and just talk to him about it. Everybody is a keyboard warrior. They hide behind their keyboards. So I did that. My heart was beating into my throat. And he just sort of opened up about he was in the Army Reserves. And so, he was training every weekend, and he had 2 part-time jobs, and he was the caretaker for his grandmother who had Alzheimer's, just like all this stuff that was going on. And so I also stuck up for myself, and I was like, when I was in school, I had to take classes in biology and algebra, and I had to do a lot of stuff that I didn't want to do. You just have to, I said, would you say to your sergeant, I prefer not to? And I was like, it's kind of funny that you're basically telling me what Bartleby was saying, like, I prefer not to. And so we just sort of like laughed about it, so I'd call him Bartleby like from then on. And so it turned out from like that to he just kept taking my classes. He took other literature, he took my Black Lit class, he took my Women's Lit class, he took Intro to Creative Writing, and we're LinkedIn acquaintances at this point. So he let me know when he was invited to ring the bell for the stock exchange one day for Veterans Day or something like that. So it's about resilience. It's about humor. It's about turning something negative, I suppose, into something positive. But it's really, again, about slowing down and not jumping to conclusions about the other.
Hey, listen, thanks for sharing your story, Amanda. It's incredible how you turned your life's toughest moments into opportunities and help others and tell just amazing stories.
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
You're welcome. And for anyone looking for help with their writing, from essays to novels, etc., all the many things that Amanda mentioned, visit www.amandawritesconsults.com. Yes, that's plural in terms of Writes Consults. Again, it's www.amandawritesconsults.com. Trust me, she'll change the way you think about writing and maybe some commas in there. So
Semicolons.
it's a semicolon.
I'm a semicolon whisperer.
And
And don't hesitate if you just want to reach out to me and schedule a 5-minute call to see if we could be the right match or if you're curious or anything like that.
yeah. So join us next week for another episode of Bridging Worlds. Until then, remember, resilience is just editing's life's rough draft. Keep building your story. Bye, everybody.
Bye.